But this is essentially your session, because this is about young investigators who are starting out in their careers, and I know that you have lots of questions, because we've got the questions from you. And we have a sort of a nice panel here around the fire. So we've got 5 more senior scientists who can tell you a little bit about their careers and how they got to be where they are, because there's so many different ways that one can decide to plan your career. And I know that those are questions that you have about, you know, how long should you be a postdoc? How do you transition from a postdoc to an independent investigator? Some of you are thinking, you know, what will you do? Do you want to go into industry or stay in academia? So I think those are questions that many of you have. So we're a fairly small group. So maybe for me, just to find out, how many of you have PhDs? Okay, not everybody yet. So who's a PhD student? No. What group do you fall into? Master student. Okay, great. So we have people at different career stages, which is fantastic. So for the master students, you're still thinking about your next step, and do you want to do a PhD? And if you do, what field do you do it in to make sure that you're setting yourself up for the career that you want? So I want the young ones to be thinking, where do you want to be 5 years from now? And then we can talk a little bit about the questions that you have about the choices that you need to make. But before we go into that, I would like to ask the panel to each introduce themselves. Would you like to go first? and just,
I don't think I got a choice.
3 to 5 minutes, and just tell the people a little bit about how you came to be where you are.
So I'm a clinician, first and foremost, a clinical geneticist, and so my research career, I did a PhD. I did partly in the lab, which I think I was put there to be for the amusement of the people who actually knew what they were doing, and I could spend all afternoon telling you about all my disasters in the lab, but fortunately for humanity, I don't go in the lab anymore. And now my research is very much clinical research, so I do research on genetic screening. So if any of you were in the talk yesterday about Mackenzie's mission, where we screened people and examined the outcomes, and I do clinical trials mainly in a disease called Friedreich's ataxia, which is a neurogenetic recessive condition, and I would encourage you, those deciding whether to do a PhD or not, I would encourage you to do a PhD. It is very useful in numerous paths that you go down. It will open doors that won't be open if you don't do that. So doing a PhD is it's a challenge and it's a lot of work, but it's incredibly satisfying, and you will be, for that period, the world expert on your area, and so I strongly encourage that.
Thank you so much, Martin. Maybe we could just ask, are there any clinicians in the audience? Anybody either doing a medical degree or have a medical degree? You're doing medicine. Okay. So I think then an interesting role model, and Martin works in Australia. Different countries have different ways of doing things, but I think a lot of countries are now looking at the clinician scientist, who are very valuable people because they can see things from both sides, from the needs of the patients, but also from the research side, and I think that's incredibly valuable. So we often have people who transition from doing a master's to doing a medical degree, but it can also go the other way around. And again, it will depend on your local context. So thank you very much, Martin. So over to you, Nicki.
Thank you. Yeah. So I currently work I'm a professor. I'm in academia. I have my own research group. I'm at the Bioinformatics Institute at a university in Cape Town. I'm very lucky because I have very little undergraduate requirements. So as I told someone yesterday, I have 3 hours of lectures a year, and I've managed to outsource 1 hour to my team member this year, which is kind of a bit shameful, but anyway, there we are. But I do some other teaching, more in short courses and for consortia and wider organizations, that kind of thing. So most of my time is spent in research. I did my PhD in molecular oncology. I was in the lab, actually, for my PhD, and then in the UK. So I'm Zimbabwean. I did my PhD in the UK, and then from there I went to UCSF in San Francisco, and I did a postdoc also in the lab in pediatric endocrinology and signal transduction pathways and the like. And then I moved to South Africa, back to sub-Saharan Africa, and I became a bioinformaticist. But just to give you the context, when I did my PhD, that was when they were still sequencing the human genome. So, I mean, I've just dated myself terribly. But bioinformatics was a new field because suddenly we were dealing with all these big volumes of data coming off the genomic studies. So I was in, bioinformatics for some years. And I also, while I was leading my research group then, I also did a master's in public health part-time. I did it in epidemiology. And then I left research for a couple of years, for about 4 years, and I worked with our local Department of Health. We were building a health information exchange for our province, which is about 7.5 million active healthcare clients. So the health data get brought in every night and gets sorted and linked to individuals. And we have this remarkable data set for our whole province. That was, it's been developed for continuity of care. So and it's not a research resource as such. So that was sort of a learning curve for me in terms of health service delivery and health informatics, which of course is entirely different to what we thought we were doing in terms of health-related research. It's a very different story to be embedded in health service delivery. But anyway, once that was standing up, I sort of ended up coming back into research. But now we work in health data integration, so we're working in health genomics and bioinformatics, but we also do epidemiological research with a very large anonymized data set from this exchange. And along the way, I've also got very involved in ethics and governance for working with health data, particularly from African populations. So human genomics data, this kind of clinical data, and then also I've been more recently involved in governance for pathogen data. So yeah, I do a lot of different things, but they all revolve around kind of what I would call ethical and equitable use of data. And I haven't been in the lab for a very long time, and I don't miss it. But what I would also say, yeah, just on the PhD idea, I also think a PhD is a very good learning curve. And I agree that if you want to go far outside academia, entering with a PhD can really help. It can kind of shortcut some of the more painful stuff. And it will also test your endurance and your staying power and your ability to be brave, I guess. So yeah, I would also recommend it should you feel that you can do it without being totally miserable. Of course, if you're going to be totally miserable, I would recommend that you give it a skip. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nicki. And I think what you see in Nicki's career is that she's done so many different things. She's been a citizen of the world, and she's also moved seamlessly, it seems, between disciplines, which I think is not easy. But they say that, you know, young people like you will probably have at least 5 careers in your lifetime. So you may end up also going from one sector to another, taking your skills, your considerable skills with you. And part of that is the license, which is the PhD, I think. It's sort of like almost your license that you walk around with, because it shows that you have the ability to think and to think independently. Because I think that's what people who are going to be employing you are going to be looking at, to see if you are self-starters, whether you have your own ideas as well as, you know, sort of fitting in with whatever the job is that you need to do. So I think that's really important. So Mark, over to you.
Yes, so my career, I'm Mark McCarthy, and I'm currently head of human genetics at a company called Genentech in the Bay Area, which is part of the Roche family. So I'm doing research in pharma, and I probably, if you'd asked me 30 years ago what I would be doing in 30 years' time, that wouldn't have even made it into the top 20 careers that I might have had. I'd probably have been a foreign correspondent and all sorts of things above that. So how did I get to do what I'm doing today? I trained as a medic in the UK and did no research really during my undergraduate or my clinical career. And trained as a physician and an endocrinologist, and then probably early 30s, just as I was reaching the point where I was thinking about consultant jobs, it became pretty clear I needed to do some research, because in the time in the UK, if you wanted to get a good job as a consultant physician, you need to do some research. So I was dragged kind of kicking and screaming into the lab as the medic in the lab. You know what it's like. It's wasn't probably the unhappiest phase of my career, I think, because you trained as a medic and you get pretty good and you go through all your board exams and things like that, and you fancy yourself pretty well. You're a kind of a 100-meter runner who's pretty fast at doing 100 meters, and then somebody says, no, don't want you to do that anymore. I want you to put you in this other place and you can learn to throw the javelin, right? And it just is a very uncomfortable period. It was for me. I finally found my feet when I started doing computational statistical analysis of the data. I found that was something I was quite adept at, so I sort of fell into that, got a bit more confidence, had a chance to extend that training by a year by going to the States to work with a guy called Eric Lander, who subsequently became more famous than he was at the time, but that was cool, and that really gave me confidence to that I might want to contemplate a research career, or at least a joint clinical and research career, which had really never been on the cards. I just thought I was doing research to get my MD or PhD or whatever, and move back to a fully clinical career. So I came back from the States into a job that was like 50% clinical, 50% research, and gradually became less clinical and more research. I moved to Oxford in 2002, started working a bit more on genetics of type 2 diabetes, got involved in the Wellcome Trust Case Control Consortium that many of you will know about, just when the GWAS era was starting, and that's what really helped my research take off. So then I stayed in Oxford 15, 16 years, working on big consortia, doing type 2 diabetes genetics and so on, working with a lot of people in Singapore and a lot of people in this room and at this meeting. And then I was approaching my late 50s, I guess, and I had itchy feet and was just trying to think, do I stay doing the same stuff? Should I do something different? I've been 15 years here. I'm getting a bit bored. Looked at some jobs in academia, looked at some jobs in industry. One day I found myself invited to give a talk at Genentech. Didn't know what Genentech was, flew out to San Francisco, gave a talk, and thought, oh, this is pretty cool. This is a place that's in pharma but doing a lot of basic research. And one thing led to another, and I eventually moved there 5 years ago. So I think a bit like Nicki, I've had at least 3 careers. I didn't ever do a PhD because medics at that time mostly did what was called an MD. It's not the same as a US MD. It was a research degree, a bit like a PhD, but you didn't have to sort of prospectively sign up for it. So it was quite popular amongst medics in the UK at the time. So yeah, my career's been a bunch of mostly happy accidents that have got me to doing what I'm doing.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I think, it just shows you serendipity plays a role, having opportunities and embracing them. And, it sounds like there were, we say your career isn't like one continuum. It's like punctuated by times when you really grow exponentially, and that kind of help you also find what you want to do. Because, I think Nicki's so right. You must do what really gets you excited, because that's what you'll do best. And so, Mark, I have to confess that I didn't know that you were a medic as well. So it's always really interesting to hear about the parallel journeys that people have. So thank you so much for sharing that. And you're the only one on the panel who's got industry experience. And I know that quite a few of you in the audience are very interested in understanding this transition. So I think they will have some questions for you. And Sarah, what about you?
Okay. So I have a completely different career path. So I started off, I left school, I did a degree in South Africa in sports science, and I majored in sports psychology. I knew I was always interested in the psychology side of sports science. And then I had a 20-year career break, and moved to England, to the UK, and I had a very large family. I have 7 children, And I also homeschooled them. So I used to hide it on my CV, and then I put it back after someone said, that's your superpower. So put it back on the CV. And while the children were younger, I started studying again, as you do. I did a second degree in psychology, and then I did a master's and a PhD. And I didn't mean to do a PhD. Someone told me that's really, they could see that I really needed to do one. So I said, oh, all right then. And I did that in cognitive neuropsychology. I specialized in aging, healthy aging. What can you do to prevent the onset of dementia, delay cognitive decline? So that was really my PhD. I did a postdoc in Leeds. I left the family behind during the week, and I traveled up, and I had nice and peace and quiet during the week, and then I came back to them on a Thursday. I really enjoyed the 2 years. My husband didn't. And so after my postdoc in Leeds, they ran out of funding to keep me on. I was working in a hospital there looking at cognitive predictors of frailty and falls. They ran out of funding. I worked for free for 6 months, and then my husband hooked me back and said, that's nonsense. So then I volunteered in a hospital for 9 months, working with stroke patients who had dementia, just as a volunteer. And then I applied for a postdoc at the University of Oxford, the Department of Psychiatry. I actually applied for one position, but was offered a different position. And I started as a psychometric analyst, looking at healthcare scales across medical sciences, both psychological and medical healthcare scales, trying to develop them to be more efficient psychometrically. I was then drawn on to the big project I work on now, which is Dementia's Platform UK. We are a data repository for 65 population and clinical cohorts. We allow researchers to use these resources for free for scientific research. So I've been the senior data manager on that for the last 8 years. While I've also developed my own scientific programs, I focus on early life events and how they impact later life brain health. We look at imaging, genomics, and clinical phenotypes. I have a large team who work on that. And I also carry on with the data management program, in that we are designing training programs and data management programs to help early career researchers navigate large longitudinal data sets. And now I'm an associate professor in the department, and yeah, my team's got really big. That's me.
Well, that's really phenomenal, and I think we should have these conversations with all our colleagues, because we discover amazing things. I think you are a superwoman. I can't imagine having 7 children. That is really impressive, but I think, you know, the work that you've done in aging is so impactful. And I got to know Sarah really through the International Health Cohorts Consortium, because we both got sort of startup grants through them. And I think Sarah's the one who has made her grant work the hardest in terms of what you've achieved. So that is really extraordinary. And I know I can see that there may be more women than men in the audience. And one of the questions young women often ask is, must I choose? Is it my career or is it the family? And I think many of us can attest to the fact that you can have both. And you just have to be super organized. But I don't know about 7 children.
I don't advocate that.
And homeschooling, I think that's absolutely phenomenal. I don't even know how you manage the programs of 7 kids. So my name is Michelle Ramsey. I'm from South Africa, so you can see we have a very strong South African connection on the podium here. So I started off my career doing a degree in agriculture, and that was purely by chance, because in my university, the only place you could do genetics was in agriculture. So I started off with plant and animal genetics. And that was sort of on the cusp of recombinant DNA technology. And I was very lucky to get an opportunity to do a 1-year master's degree by coursework and research report in recombinant DNA technology and microbial genetics. And then once I'd finished the master's, I went to do a PhD in human genetics. And I never left, because I felt that I'd found the place that I wanted to be. So the very first thing that I did after my PhD was to set up a diagnostic laboratory. And it may be interesting to some of you that we did our first prenatal diagnosis by DNA analysis in 1984. using southern blotting before PCR was discovered. But it was a huge learning curve, and we slowly expanded, what we could do in the laboratory. But at the same time, I was teaching medical students and also teaching an honors degree and having masters and PhD students. And one of the things we needed to do at our university in South Africa was to write a textbook that was more appropriate for African populations, because we realized at that stage that, the molecular bioscience or clinical genetics textbooks did not have good examples from Africa, and they generally didn't have infectious diseases genetics, which we also needed to look at, because Africa has this double burden of disease, infectious and non-communicable disease. So you often do, what is needed in your environment. And for us, teaching the medical students, we thought we needed our own textbook, so that's what we did. I did do a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship in London. And I think, for me, that was one of those wow moments where I accelerated my experiences, my learning, but I also learned how to network and to start building up a network. And now, several decades later, I still leverage my London network at conferences, in many things that I do. And that's one thing that I would say to you as young people. Build your networks. Do it with your peers, but do it also with people that you meet that you think might, have opportunities for you in the future, or just mentor you in a very light way about, what might be possible. And I know we're not specifically talking about mentorship, but I think that is critical for every young person. You don't have to keep a mentor for life. You can, and you don't, if you feel that you're not making progress, choose another. You don't have to be married to them. So I think, there's so many important things to learn. So I've now progressed through my career, and 10 years ago, I have had the wonderful opportunity to start a new research institute in South Africa. And we're actually celebrating 10 years. I can't believe how quickly those 10 years have gone by. So, embrace every stage of your careers and enjoy them. I think that enjoyment of science, if we can't have fun, we probably shouldn't be doing it. Right, so I'm going to open up to you to ask some questions. I do have some of the questions that you've already put sort of in the electronic receiver, but maybe, you'd like to be more interactive. So who would like to start the ball rolling? You've now heard a few different things, but you may have issues of your own that you'd like to get some advice on or just hear a little bit more about. Who'd like to start?
Michelle, maybe you could read, because I haven't seen the questions that came through. Are there a lot? Oh, okay. Will you help us if there's overlap? Okay, great.
Yep. Do you want to take one of those?
Hi, thank you. I'm Tsane from UWC in South Africa. So my question is, how, for those that made the postdoc going forward transition, so because I'm a postdoc, so how did you make that jump to get to like where you are? How did you bridge it?
Okay, great question, because I think it isn't an easy thing, and you need a job and a career path. I don't know what your experience is, and I'd love to hear, because I think, what I'm noticing is that many young people now do more than one postdoc, and that period often lasts about 6 years. But, that may be pretty country specific. But at the end of the day, you want to know that you can make a living, right, from being a postdoc to the next stage. Nicki, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I can chip in. So it's not always a popular message, but it's very hard, the process. And Tane knows because she's in my group. So she knows my history a bit, but I think it's worth sharing things. So I only got my first permanent position 2 years ago as a professor. Up until then, I've been raising my own money, raising my own salary. I've never been paid by a university or an institute from their own funds. I've always been on a grant. So I think step one is probably to get a funded position, at least percentages of your time on other people's grants, so senior research grants. But what's seminal is getting your first grant in your own name. That is when you will transition to being taken seriously as a researcher if your role is one of research. But I know it differs depending where you are. For example, when I have students who come from other countries in Africa, from West Africa particularly, they're more likely to get a tenured position earlier on in a university. But in South Africa, it's incredibly difficult. And then if you're like me, a foreigner, there are a lot of opportunities that are simply closed to you as well. So yeah, the uncomfortable truth is if you want to stay in the game, you have to be prepared for a lot of uncertainty. So until 2 years ago, the longest contract I ever had was 3 years. But normally I got 1 or 2 years at a go. So I was trying to build research groups, trying to build a research program with zero certainty. And then there's always the anxiety about what happens when the contract runs out. What if you haven't secured your salary from somewhere else? So it's not for the faint-hearted. And you have to really enjoy it, or you have to have Stockholm Syndrome, which I think is probably what I have. So when I have new students joining me for a PhD, I have a kind of counseling with them to check where they want to be. And I'm very upfront. It's not an easy path. So it's a great question, and I think it's important to understand what the path entails in your environment. Maybe in some regions it's easier, and you don't have to wait to your 50s to actually get a salary that comes in every month. But maybe you're in a region where it's very tricky. So yeah, you need to know what the possibilities are and also what the possibilities aren't. It is nice when you arrive finally, even if it takes you a long time, to a more secure position. I think grant writing is essential, yeah, and trying to be the PI on your own grant. But start small, start with small grants, and then over time that snowballs after you get your first grant in your own name. Yeah.
So yes, I can say exactly the same as Nicki. I'm still on fixed term contracts because I'm in Oxford, and Oxford is a country of its own. They've got their own rules. You can be a postdoc there for 20 years, literally. And in order to go on to a permanent salary, you have to really bring in the funding. So although my portfolio is around 49 million, it's not good enough for them to offer me a salary yet. And so it really does depend on institution and whether you're up for that type of career. It's brutal, rejection, it's constant. But even though they've said, oh, but you've got an open-ended contract, as long as you remain profitable. And I think that is, I mean, the industry people can talk to that, but that is quite a big difference between industry and academia. Academia, you have to keep bringing in those grants before you get that permanent position and climb up the career ladder. And then by institution, it's more easy or more difficult. But I don't lecture. At Oxford, you are allowed to choose a career where you do no lecturing whatsoever, as long as you focus on bringing in those big grants. I have PhD students, I have master's students, but I don't actually have to give lectures. So I can build that scientific career.
Gosh, listening to the two of you, I feel I've had such an easy time. So there are different avenues. So I was fortunate in that by setting up a diagnostic lab, that gave me other opportunities. And, although at the time it was difficult, we had to, build the lab, get the staff, train the staff, but that also gave us an opportunity to do research. So for those of you who have an opportunity to work in a diagnostic lab, that could also be a way of moving into research. So some people enjoy, I always find it strange when people think that it's boring, because I think in genetics, like almost every case is different. So even if you work in a diagnostic lab, you still learn an enormous amount. And you can often use that data also to build a research career where you use that, to write papers. So that is another alternative. And a lot of my colleagues have full-time teaching jobs, but although they're full-time teaching, they're still expected to do, 20 or 30% research, and that often is enough to get them with a foot in the door. So I think different avenues. But Martin, I'd like to hear from you what happens in Australia. I know that yours isn't a typical journey.
So I'm a clinician, and I made a decision when I did my PhD that I would never rely on what you've done, and I will have a clinical salary and I'll do the research as best I can. And so, you know, that was the decision I made, and for better or worse. But I have plenty of colleagues who are exactly your description, who live grant to grant, and it is. I admire them enormously, and they all have managed for the 30 years that I've worked there, or 20 years in research, that they've managed to keep getting funding. But it is, you have to have broad shoulders. You have to, research is, the highs are the highest, but the lows are the lowest, because the definition of research is you get criticised. Whatever you do in research, there are people criticising you. You submit a paper, you get, oh, that's no good, we don't want to accept your paper. You write a grant, no good, don't give you a grant. So you've got to be very stoic and you know, swear under your breath at the grant committee, and then get up, dust your shirt off, and get back in. And if you've got that personality, you'll succeed eventually. And as I say, if you stick with it, and when you get those grants and get those good papers, there's no better feeling. So.
I think resilience is one of the...
Resilience is the word I was trying to
Yes,
think of.
that is what we need as scientists. You need to be able to take criticism, and you need to be able to throw away what is not good in terms of criticism. Don't take everything to heart. Cultivate a bit of a thick skin, but believe in yourself. And I've recently been reading some biographies, amongst them the RNA researcher, what is her name again? The one who got the Nobel Prize for the vaccine, Kariko. Anyways, it's a biography worth reading, because she was so determined as a scientist to make it, despite the fact that everybody told her it was too hard, you can't work with RNA, you're never going to make it. She had a very difficult journey, you know, moving from Eastern Europe to America and trying to build a career there, and by all odds progressed to be a Nobel laureate, and now is so sought after, I think, in industry, very much so. And so I think, you know, for the young people is also know yourself, because we're all different. You know, if I think of Nicki and Sarah, they've gone through this journey. It's been okay for them, because they can live with uncertainty. They don't feel that they need answers, or they need to know what they're going to be doing for the next 10 years. I think you both had confidence in your abilities to be able to find the next step. You're saying not always.
So I have to say it was not comfortable at all. And I'm quite an anxious person, in that I don't like to not have a view of where I'm going to be in 2 or 3 years' time. If I had my time over, I don't think I would do it. Okay. Yeah, it was brutal and exhausting and very stressful. Yeah.
So I think, you know, for you as young people, you need to decide whether that's what you want to put yourself through. And I think, you know, we all have our lived experience. You have your families who may be putting pressure on you, your peers, you may be watching them sort of march right past you. But you have to think what is right for you, right? Because we all should be walking to our own drumbeat and, you know, thinking of what we want to do as individuals. But Mark, have you got some thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I mean, probably not personally, because as a medic, a bit like Martin, I always had that in the back pocket, and if the research didn't pan out, I would have gone back to that. And that always gave me a salary, so that was good. But I suppose one of the things I would bring up here is that increasingly folks in this area are thinking of industry as a career. And I'm not trying to do down academia and so on, because industry isn't forever.
You should do down academia. You
well,
should.
no, I'm not.
No, it's hard, yeah.
But I mean, certainly you will know that a lot of people in genomics and in computational sciences who are trained through academia are ending up in industry. That's certainly happening. There's situations in Singapore, but that's certainly happening in UK and in US. In fact, it's pretty hard to find very many of my peers that I came through academia with from the Wellcome Trust case control and things like that who haven't moved to industry. And that means I've got a very good network of folks in other companies, which helps us actually to do some of the big pre-competitive consortia that we do together. But for earlier stage researchers, I mean, I'm constantly having folks who have done either PhDs or postdocs coming and applying for positions. And it is a very attractive path forward. It's obviously not without its drawbacks. You can be hired and fired, particularly in the US, in biotech or pharma pretty quickly. So it's not necessarily, it's a bit more stable and usually a bit better remunerated than academia for sure. But it's not necessarily a path to internal employment. Biotech particularly, of course, where you're maybe a little bit more buffeted by the markets and you can earn an awful lot or you can go bust and so on. But I think people learn an awful lot from being in biotech, where you tend to have to be master of multiple roles, particularly in a small biotech. And that usually powers people to gain a huge amount of experience, whatever the outcome of that biotech is, and to move fairly quickly to another opportunity. So yeah, I mean, definitely think about pharma, but also think about other opportunities. There's many other, I'm constantly impressed, for example, by the folks that I encounter in our partnering, our business development within our organization. So these are typically people who've got some scientific background, but have then maybe got an MBA or something, or done some additional training, and then move back into pharma in partnering. And they're spectacular. They get the science, but they also have this kind of understanding of business operations and so on. That's really impressive, and that looks like a pretty interesting career as well. There's many different opportunities. Don't feel you're wedded to a path in academia.
Thank you so much, Mark. I have a question for you, but I'm going to open it to the floor first because we want to hear your questions.
So I feel the imbalance aura between academia and industry, like really hard in academia. But anyway, so I'm the one. I wrote the question about academia versus industry conundrum in the Google form, because myself, I'm a postdoc. I got my own salary from a fellowship, from a grant, from Wellcome Trust grant, and my background is population genetics. I'm doing population scale genomics, and also working with the hunter-gatherer populations in some island. But now that you have a lot of experience, yeah. Now that you're a senior and you have a lot of experience in either industry and academia, so if you would go back 10, 20 years, what would you've done to do better, to prepare yourself better, to make your pace faster, to transition into either academia or industry?
Do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. I think it's a great question. So I didn't, although I had some great teachers along the way, I didn't have a mentor who really had my interests at heart. So I was good at writing papers, and I was able to churn those out, and I was good at doing the research, but I didn't have a mentor to help me writing grants, so I learned by trial and error, and that's painful. So I think now there's more focus on early career investigator developments, but I would have liked to have started writing successful grants earlier. I think that would have been a game changer, and to have the confidence to write my own grants earlier. I think would have been really helpful. So certainly from my side, you need the papers because they open the crack in the door that you can get your foot into. So writing papers you have to do, and you have to do it well. But at some point, having extra papers, it's neither here nor there. It becomes having good papers. As you reach a certain threshold, that's less important. But I think that thing of getting your own money and carving your own path, I wish I'd started that earlier and had the skills and confidence to do so. Yeah.
Okay, Mark. No, I'm happy to sit this one out. But.
I mean, I really want to speak up about mentors. I think that's been mentioned, and if I think in my career, I've been very fortunate to have mentors that I think I would not be sitting here without the mentors. So if you've got people looking out for you and helping you and advising you, I think that gives you many opportunities because, there are many fish in the sea, and if you want to be the first to get there, then I think having people looking out for you and looking after your back is, I think, invaluable.
I think that is hugely important, and partly it is about what you want to do too. Like, how do you set yourself up to be desirable to people who might want to employ you in the future? So if you think about, is academia the environment that you want to work in, or is it industry? Have you got any thoughts about that at this stage?
Yeah, so I'm now in my 7th years after my PhD, but it's also by choice. Also, there's one year delay due to COVID and something like that, right? Because by doing this kind of fellowship, I have my own, like, a pleasure to work directly with my own research and getting my hands dirty with the data analysis, something like that, right? When you have students, you kind of let go your project to the students, and you don't really work directly with the data and stuff like that, right? So it's also by choice. So what I don't know, so back to my questions that between academia and industries, because I don't know how academia works in general, because I didn't know that it is that hard in terms of, like, you have to live grant by grant until I don't know how many years, and I don't know how industry works, because I still want to do like research, basic research or applied research, but I heard that Mark said that in Genentech they're also doing basic research as well. So I would like to know this range of and space of choices that you could do related to doing research, actually.
Maybe I can comment on that. So, yeah, I mean, clearly if you have a successful research career in academia, you probably generally have more freedom to take the path that you want to take, but to some extent that's somewhat illusory, because that freedom is contingent on people in a dark room somewhere in Bethesda or wherever your grants are being reviewed, who knows significantly less about the research topic than you do, making a decision as to whether you get funding to do that research or not, right? So you have the illusion of freedom, but it's not always quite as unrestricted as it might appear. Clearly, depending where you go in industry and the role you take on in industry, it might be one that is much more restricted and much more tied to the fortunes of the company and what it wants you to do. I mean, Genentech was attractive to me because it's famed really as the one place in the pharma world that tries to apply sort of academic precepts and ways of doing research, and has been quite successful at bringing that and making a successful business of developing drugs out from that kind of basic scientific inquiry. But it's probably not typical of industry. And it's one of the reasons that I was happy to go there, really, because I felt I would have a certain amount of freedom to do some of the projects that I wanted to do.
Can I?
Yes, also, yeah, please contribute.
Sorry, do you want to say?
No,
Oh.
no.
So I just also want to add something that it's not often talked about, but it's something that I've seen like a scary amount of in academia. And I can't comment for industry because I've not worked in industry, so I can only speak for academia. It's not uncommon to see young, successful career academic scientists who are kind of held back by their seniors. And yeah, we don't talk about this much. It's not a nice side of academia, but you sometimes find you have a senior PI. I mean, the work in a group is done by the postdocs. The hands-on stuff that makes it all happen is the postdocs and the junior scientists. They're incredibly productive. So I guess what I'm saying is if you feel you're in a space where somehow your senior line manager, PI, the person above you, is somehow not pulling you up or pushing you up or really trying to encourage you to move onwards and upwards, but is rather saying, no, I think you need to do some more work on this PhD, even though you've done, 5 years of work, and I think you need to do another paper, and that always shifts the goalpost, so you never move up and onwards. It's a bit of a flag. Right, so the message, the take-home message of this is make sure your mentor is working on your side, because sometimes senior scientists benefit very well from having people who never move out of their group and who never go to the next level. And I don't say this lightly, it sounds like a not very nice accusation, but I've seen far too many young and mid-career scientists who never get to the next level because they are very valuable to their seniors where they sit. Yeah. So it's just like a point of checking in all the time. Are the people around me, and it's following up what you said about mentorship, do they have my back? Or do I actually have their back without any benefit? Yeah. And make sure that the people around you are actually on side. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I think those are really important sort of messages for you, and not to be scared to move. It is sometimes difficult because you also get comfortable with the mentor. Like, even if you feel that they're not having your back, it's kind of the easier route. Well, the easier route isn't always the best route for you. But I love that you are working and building cohorts. You said you're building a cohort in a hunter-gatherer cohort on an island. It sounds amazing.
So, I'm working in Indonesia. Now, my own project that was funded by Wellcome Trust is I'm working with open genetics and functional genomics and microbiomes as well from hunter-gatherer populations in Kalimantan, in Borneo. But our lab is also doing, working with thousands of samples, working with whole genome sequencing, and do this kind of cohorts. And I'm also doing the analysis as well, bioinformatics analysis on that as well. So it's getting interesting, getting exciting. So that's why there are trade-offs,
But I think, being multi-skilled also makes it easier for you to go to the next step because you have so much experience in so many ways. But you, of course, want to rise in your own career. So that is your challenge for the next 5 years, I think. Can I just get a sense in the room, like how many people are really contemplating going into industry? Thank you. Do you want to comment?
Hi, so I'm actually currently a postdoc at A-STAR. But I mean, it's just like I'm in my current field. People who work at Genentech earn 4 times more than I do for less work. Yeah, less politics. Like, you don't need to think about what you need to do. You just need to do the project assigned, deliver whatever analysis you're supposed to deliver in. It seems like a lot more stable of a career than at A-STAR where you're permanently on contract.
So Mark, can we just ask you, is there less politics in industry than there is in academia?
No, look, every big organization has politics, right? I've yet to encounter any big organization where there's not a lot of politics. I will say one thing, it's not all rosy in industry, but certainly one thing you have, and it's partly to be honest. It's the financial remuneration that comes from the bonuses and the stocks and shares, but it's also from the fact, particularly a place like Genentech, a lot is, you are working to a goal of delivering something for patients, right? I mean, I'm sure everybody in this room is ultimately thinking about that, but that is quite a good North Star that that you have within the organization, and that you can derive as much pleasure from somebody else being successful, even if your own program isn't being quite that successful. So maybe you don't have the same sense of that in academia, can sometimes seen as a bit more of a zero-sum game. If their grant doesn't succeed, maybe they won't need so much lab space, so maybe I can get that lab space that I was looking for. That sort of mentality, which certainly I felt a bit in Oxford, which is a bit dog eat dog, it's fair to say. So yeah, there's that. I would probably challenge the bit about not working hard at Genentech. It's but otherwise, yeah.
Martin, did you want to say something first? I saw you were getting
Oh, just a very good, a quick one. I had a postdoc, and she moved countries during COVID to go back to Romania, and she took a temporary position in pharma, and she worked a very, very competent analyst, epidemiologist, and after a year, she did win 2 fellowships, and she's come back to academia, and she's working back in my lab. And the main message that she had about that difference was that she said she had no ownership over what she did. So she delivered on the project exactly as you said. She did the stats, and then one day she said, "Oh, could I interpret that a little bit more? Or can I see that data? Where did?" And they said, "No, that's got nothing to do with you. That's so." And she even had to take that she had a PhD out of her signature, because at the level she went in. Now, that's one single example, but, she said she knows it's brutal, but she's come back to academia.
My comment was just to say that there's politics in every... If you have 2 human beings, there's politics. If you're on your own, maybe not, but as long as there's 2 people, there'll be politics. And whatever job you'll do, there'll be stresses and there'll be good things, and humans always focus on the bad things much more than the good things, and we take the good things for granted. So just keep eyes open would be my advice, and there might be more than one path to a happy career.
So let me open it up again. Questions from you. What do you want to know? Anybody thinking about your next step? Do you want to have a go? As a master student, what are you thinking?
Hi, I'm Colin, and I'm from the US, and I think there are a few of my colleagues here who are doing master here at NUS as well, and we are doing a precision health and medicine program, and we are the first batch, so we are quite unsure of what we should do in the future. So I'm just wondering if let's say you can go back in your 20s, like, will you choose to go down the same road as what you did?
Great question. You want to go first?
I think yes. I think by doing many different things like I've done, I've had a career break. I didn't mention to you that I studied dietary and I did immunology, all in between that. I think it's added to what I am now. So if I went back, I'd probably still choose the crazy path, which is the one I'm on, because I think it's made me the scientist and the mentor that I am to young people.
Yeah, a bit like that as well, right? I mean, I would never have known at 20 I was going to follow this particular path, but I feel quite blessed to have been able to do that. And just the point where I was getting bored with something, I was able to shimmy across and do something that was exciting and stimulating. And so, I feel very fortunate to have been able to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, so would I do it again? I'm not entirely sure. I will say, when I still remember the lesson when I was 16 in our biology class when we first learned about the central dogma, and I was like, wow, this is cool. this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I'm one of those few people kind of in my cohort who wanted to do that, did it, stuck with it, and have been working essentially with DNA in one form or another since then. So it was obviously quite a calling for me in that it was just fascinating. So in terms of satisfying my curiosity, I'm a very curious person, so I'm never bored. And where I am now, I have absolute freedom to pursue the things that interest me, which is kind of dangerous because it means I do way too much, but it also means that I am never bored. If I have a thought about, oh wow, that's quite interesting, I wonder how does that work, I can pursue it, and that's a wonderful gift for, like Mark, I struggle with getting bored. I wish I had more legal knowledge, and I sometimes think if I had my time over, maybe I would have done law, but actually I'm sort of looking into doing some more studies in law because I just never get bored of studying either. So it's a difficult question for me to answer, very messed up path, and because I've worked in a country which has a weak currency, I mean, retirement is not looking comfortable at this stage.
I love seeing patients, but I don't want to do it for 40 hours a week, and so I think it's a great privilege to do the mixed career, and I suspect Mark had similar thoughts at the same age, and it's fantastic that your life can take you in so many directions. And, I think there is definitely lucky things that happen along the way, but you definitely make your own luck there. The saying, the harder you work, the luckier you get, I think is a very generally true statement.
Yeah, I think maybe to say when I was in my early 20s, I never thought that I would have a career in academia. I always thought I want to get a job, I want to be secure, I want to have, the car, I want to settle. So in some ways, opportunities just come, but you do have choices. You can either embrace them or not. And I think I was just lucky that I really enjoyed what I did. I remember when I started as a PhD student, because we had to build the lab before we could do the work, and I had to supervise master students at the time. It wasn't easy, but it was enormously rewarding, to think that you could actually build something out of nothing. So I think looking for opportunities, but it is, having your eyes open, because there's so many opportunities for you. And I still remember my very first international conference, which was in Corfu or something. It was like very exotic, and how you had to sort of take that jump when you get into that new environment to talk to people and to figure out what's happening. Because I think often, when you're in one place, you don't know anything else, and you may think that your education isn't as good as it is for somebody who's somewhere else. So you've got to test it. But it is, you have control over some of that, because, how you read, what your background knowledge is, that you're looking a little bit wider than just your project. I think all of those things are important. Mark, I wanted to ask you a question, and I don't know whether this, we only had one person put up their hand to say about industry, but you were saying that you get so many people who approach you, like PhD students and so on. What makes somebody stand out? To be attractive to you to engage further? And I should ask that also for the others. So what can these young people do to make themselves stand out? If you get 30 applications, which is the one you would look at, and why?
It's a good question. I mean, I'd probably still see it through a fairly academic bent, so I'm looking for folks who have a pretty good, clear idea of what they want to do, and have the necessary skill set for the job. I mean, at Genentech we do have postdocs, so I've got 4 postdocs, for example, and so that's very much modelled on the academic experience, and that's certainly what I'm looking for there. I mean, most of those folks are considering doing a postdoc in industry rather than postdoc in academia, because they're thinking they're likely to go into industry anyway, and in fact are the folks who do the postdoc program at Genentech, which looks very much like a standard postdoc, 4-year postdoc. 92% stay in industry, about 8% go back to academia. So that's really for three reasons. One, it's a selected group, right? Most of those coming are contemplating going into industry. Second, we'd like to believe they have a good time and feel quite comfortable and have their belief that they wanted to go into industry reinforced. And the third is certainly in the US system, it's if you come into industry and you haven't been able to compete for NIH grants and so on, then you're at somewhat of a disadvantage if you want to go back to academia compared with peers who might be coming with their own funding. So
so you're almost saying, you know, be careful not to close any doors, but
yeah, I think if you are going to go into industry, and particularly if you're thinking of doing a postdoc in industry, which, you know, in many situations still a good thing to do, because then you can go in rather than your colleague who went back to Romania and went into a job presumably at a fairly low level in the company and therefore was in that situation just being told, you know, your job is to analyze this GWAS data set or whatever it is. If you've done a postdoc and so on, whether you've done it in academia or whether you've done it in industry, you've then demonstrated further competence, you've built up other skills, you've built up your network, and then you can go into industry. If you stay in industry, you can go in at a higher level, one where you have a little bit more control over what you're doing and a little bit more ownership of the projects that you're involved in.
yeah, because I think we look for agile thinkers, you know, and how do you demonstrate that to somebody on a CV? That you can do things, that you're a self-starter, right? So you have to think about what you can do that will have impact, that will have people sit up and think, you know, you're willing to go the extra mile, or you have that extra curiosity. Because to me, there's nothing more off-putting when a prospective PhD student comes and they say, I want to cure cancer. And I'm going, have you got any idea where the field is? What's happened? Have you read around it? You know, so think also carefully when you go into interviews how you present yourselves. You know, what is it that would make somebody want to employ you? And I don't know, I often also look for a cultural fit for people who think in a similar sort of way. Like for me, generosity, a willingness to share is really important. It's hard for me if somebody comes and all they're interested in is their own career and advancing it. I like to see that they want to do more. And I think a lot of young people also talk about the fact that they want to do something that has impact. But you need to kind of understand what that might mean. And, you know, one of you said that you like it when they come with an idea, that they're not just sort of saying, generally, I want to be a bioinformaticist, but that I really want to understand whether it's a disease focus or a methodological question. You know, I think that's often very good too, to think, you know, when you're reading, what are the papers that really keep you awake? You know, that make you think, I want to know more. Because that's probably where you're going to make a difference. Yes, another question.
Networking and the importance of networking, but like how do you form like these great networks? Because obviously, I mean, with well-established people, you know, okay, that person can probably open that door, but like with your own peers, you can't exactly preempt that, oh, he's going to be like big one day. So like, let me go talk to him. So, but how do you successfully, I mean, because especially like with academia and like where we are at, I have a lot of like imposter syndrome. Like you're not sure, like, are you pitching yourself too low, too high? Like, you know, how do you present yourself in order to be able to form those valuable networks and just like be like out there, like in a good way?
Such a great question. And, you know, it's probably a bit of a hit and miss, but the more you do it, the more confident you become. But you're so right that how you pitch it is very important. And, you know, also trying to read your audience and who you're talking to, because the same things don't work for the same people. But I think, you know, people say, and it's so easy, just be yourself, probably goes a long way. I think honesty and earnestness is really important, but you have to go also with insight and intelligence, you know, like you have to think about how you interact. Any advice here?
I know this does take you in a very hard work situation, but it's volunteering. I remember at my current position, when I first started it, if I saw any opportunity that would get me somewhere else, that would leapfrog me or network myself with the big names, I volunteered. I literally said, oh, do you need help proofreading? Anything from proofreading to, do you want me to carry those programs to the next conference and for me to stand on your stand? Because I know a bit about what you do and I'm willing to put in the graft. And I think that I can honestly say today, I've got grants all over the world. I work with collaborators everywhere. And most of it is because I just said yes. Fine, I might be overburdened now, but I just kept saying yes, and I knocked on the doors. And I can honestly say that worked for me.
I think just to follow up on that, I mean, so much of the science that we do these days is team science. It's moved on from the days of papers with 3 or 4 authors and being first author being everything. Now you can put a huge amount of work in and be 10th author on some big paper, but you know, that 10th authorship, you were responsible for some element of work, figure 3 or whatever it was, that would previously have been, you know, 1 or even 2 papers in your own name. So getting confidence to navigate in that space, and that's really tough, because on the one hand there's this pressure on you to have your own papers and leadership, and I know some people really struggle with that, and I've had all sorts of people in my labs over the years, some who are just too happy to just do the team science bit and not look out for opportunities where they could claim a bit of ownership, others who cling on to every bit of ownership and won't talk to anybody else in the team because they think they're going to get, trying to think of a polite way of saying it, but they're going to get disadvantaged if they share. So I think it's really important just being able to find a truthful and honest way to navigate through that space. And that sometimes means some give and some take, but you build up trust with a set of collaborators like that, then I think that goes a long way. There's a quote variously attributed to Roosevelt or his wife, I've never got to the bottom of it, but which says you can get an awful lot done when you don't take any credit for it.
I think great advice. We're almost at the end of our time, so if you would like to comment, Nicki, and then
Sure, I'll keep it
Martin,
brief,
think of
yeah.
some pearls of wisdom.
So I think for me, something that makes a big difference on who I choose to network with is when people are professional and reliable. And I don't think those can be underestimated. So if you want to build your networks and you want to have people in your networks who are people who will draw you along and take you up, one of the ways to be like a preferred partner in the network is to be absolutely reliable. So if you say you're going to deliver and deliver very well, and also just to be very professional in your conduct. So yeah, you know, don't write to someone who you want to have a collaboration with and say, how are you? You know, they're not going to be interested. So it's about keeping it very professional, making an effort. I mean, I would even say looking professional. So it's great being a student and you can wear your jeans and t-shirts or whatever, but if you want to make that transition, it's about at the right moment knowing when to spruce up a bit. You turn up 5 minutes early, not 20 minutes early, but 5 minutes early. You're always on time, you always deliver, and you always conduct yourself in a professional way. I think those kind of impressions actually matter when you're trying to build this network of people who will remember you the next time round when there's a collaboration coming up, when there's something to be done. They'll be like, oh yeah, that person presents well, and you know, they're always reliable, they always deliver. You'll become a preferred partner in the network. So I think it's very important, yeah.
I'll just finish to say, be brave. You know, there's no person, if you know, the President of the United States happens to be there, you should talk to that person, and there's no person who's too high to talk to, and in fact, they'll appreciate you coming up and having a chat to them, and it will leave an impression.
Well, that sounds like wonderful advice, and I liked what Sarah said in the beginning. She said she had a superpower, and I think for each of you to think about, you know, what is it that makes you unique? What can you contribute to a team, and how do you want to build, you know, your own brand? So I think I'd like to thank everybody who asked questions. Thank you for submitting your questions. I think we did indirectly address a lot of them, and I hope that you got something out of listening to these older folk talk about their careers and what they've done. Chisholm, I don't know if you have some last things. Perfect. Thank you, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you.